The first batch Kenji Arakawa ordered, tested for poison, came back clean. That should have relieved him. Instead, the report showed that Dr. Amara Vale had removed a compound nobody outside his father's inner circle was supposed to know existed. She had done it with enough precision to leave the rest of the drug untouched. If you're hearing this anywhere, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. 3 days earlier, Kenji had considered Amara an expensive obstacle. She had been at the underground laboratory for less than 7 months. She had already delayed 4 production runs of K-17, the compound Arakawa Holdings intended to push through its private distribution network before the next succession review. The laboratory sat below a logistics center in eastern Tokyo. It was hidden behind freight infrastructure and corporate paperwork rather than steel doors and armed theatrics. The legitimate divisions upstairs handled medical transport, refrigeration systems, customs brokerage, and pharmaceutical storage. The lower level handled things no public prospectus mentioned. Kenji rarely visited the formulation floor unless something had gone wrong. Something had. Amara stood beside a stainless workbench while 2 senior chemists waited for her approval. She did not sign. The stability profile is unacceptable. The production manager looked at Kenji before answering her. It cleared yesterday. Not under my method. We are shipping tomorrow. Then, delay shipping. Kenji examined the screen she had rotated toward him. Columns of spectral data meant enough to him to recognize deviation. They did not tell him whether the deviation justified freezing a batch worth more than some of the smaller companies in the Arakawa portfolio. He looked at her instead. Amara was slight younger than most of the department heads and almost irritatingly unresponsive to hierarchy. She wore a white coat over dark trousers, her hair tied back, sleeves pushed above narrow wrists. She did not perform defiance. She simply behaved as if the chemical result had authority over everyone in the room, including him. "What happens if we ship it?" Kenji asked. "The wrong people receive something I am not prepared to certify." "That is not an answer. It is the answer that matters." One of the chemists lowered his eyes. Kenji noticed. Amara noticed him noticing. That irritated him more than her refusal. K-17 had become the most politically important product in his father's organization. Publicly, it was a proprietary synthetic analgesic moving through private research channels before broader licensing. Privately, certain distributors paid extraordinary premiums for access to limited batches. The money mattered. Masato Arakawa had suffered a major stroke 6 months earlier. Since then, the council had begun deciding whether Kenji would succeed him or whether authority should be divided among older men who believed the family had become too dependent on corporate structures. Kenji's argument for succession was simple. He could make the legitimate network more profitable than the old one. K-17 was supposed to prove it. Instead, his newest chemist was holding the line because of a graph most of the council could not read. Ryuhei Kanzaki arrived 20 minutes later. He had worked beside Masato for almost 3 decades and had survived every phase of the family's transition from street-level operations to legitimate corporate holdings. His authority came less from rank than from memory. He knew which companies existed because of strategy, which existed because of favors, and which existed because someone had once needed a place to bury liability. He listened while the production manager explained the delay. Then he looked at Amara. "You were hired to improve consistency. I was hired to certify what leaves this room. You were hired by a company. That does not change the molecule." Kanzaki almost smiled. Kenji knew that expression. It meant somebody had reduced a complex problem to a useful one. Outside the lab, Kanzaki spoke quietly. "She is technically gifted. That sounds like a warning." "It is. Specialists often confuse expertise with mandate." Kenji glanced through the glass partition. Amara had returned to the workstation. She was not watching them. Kanzaki continued. "The market is unstable. We finally have a product with demand strong enough to carry the transition. Every delayed shipment creates questions. Questions create hesitation. Hesitation creates challengers. He did not need to say Daigo's name. Kenji understood. What do you suggest? Move certification to Dr. Ishida. Keep Vale on analysis. Let her object in writing if that makes her comfortable. Kenji looked back through the glass. Amara was comparing batch numbers against something on a separate tablet. Not concentration levels. Shipment identifiers. He filed the detail away, without knowing why. She will resign. Then she resigns. Kenzaki's answer came too quickly to be personal. That was why Kenji accepted it. There was no visible grudge, no insult to settle. From Kenzaki's perspective, Amara was an employee obstructing an operation at the worst possible time. Replace one point of authority, and the system moved again. Kenji signed the reassignment that afternoon. He did not call Amara into his office. She received the notice electronically. 2 minutes later, she entered anyway. You removed my final approval. I moved it. To someone who has not run the secondary stability sequence, Dr. Ishida has 22 years in pharmaceutical formulation, and he was not asked to test what I was testing. Kenji closed the document on his screen. What exactly are you testing? For the first time, she hesitated. Not long. Enough. The product as it actually behaves. That answer will not protect your position. I know. Her lack of appeal surprised him. Most employees fought for status when it was taken from them. Amara seemed more concerned with access. She looked toward his desk, where a schedule of outbound batches remained open. Which lots are leaving tomorrow? Kenji followed her gaze. Why? Because if you insist on doing this, I want to know how much time you are giving me. He studied her, giving you for what she left, without answering. The first shipment moved the next morning. Then another. No contamination alert followed. No regulator appeared. No employee collapsed. For 48 hours, Kenzaki seemed correct. Production normalized. The council stopped asking why one foreign chemist had delayed a revenue line. Kenji spent those 2 days preparing for a succession briefing. He told himself the laboratory problem had been administrative. On the third morning, his logistics chief called him before 7. A distributor in Yokohama had rejected 2 K-17 consignments. Not because the packaging was damaged, not because the purity was low. According to the complaint, the material had lost its commercial effect. Kenji read the phrase twice. What does that mean? They refused to specify. Who else received the same lots? 2 secondary distributors. Both have requested replacement inventory. Kenji stood. Freeze everything from those batches. By 8, the underground lab was sealed to non-essential staff. By 8:15, internal access logs showed that Amara Vale had entered the formulation room at 2:13 a.m. the night before the shipments left. She had used her own credential. No attempt to hide it. Kenji found her in a small analysis room beside the main floor. She was reviewing samples. He placed the access record beside her hand. You entered formulation after your authority was removed. Yes. You altered K-17. Yes. Her directness stopped him. What did you add? Nothing. The distributors say it does not work. It works. Not according to them. That depends on what they were buying. Kenji pulled the sample tray away from her. Do you understand what happens if you have compromised this line? Amara looked at the tray, then at him. I understand exactly what I compromised. He stepped closer. He lowered his voice because there were technicians on the other side of the glass. Explain it. No. You are standing in a facility my family controls after admitting you altered a protected formulation without authorization. And yet you are asking me questions instead of calling security. That annoyed him because it was true. Do not mistake restraint for trust. I don't. He waited. She said nothing else. Kenji ordered her credentials suspended. He had every available sample from the affected lots sent to an independent analytical laboratory unaffiliated with Arakawa Holdings. Kanzaki objected when he learned. "We have our own people. That is the problem. You believe Vale over your department. I believe Data over everybody." Kanzaki watched him for a moment. "Your father used to say the same thing." Kenji looked back at the older man. Then he should appreciate the expense. Kanzaki did not answer. The results arrived after midnight. Kenji read them alone first. Then again with the independent chemist on the phone. No foreign agent, none. No dilution, no degradation, no significant degradation. Kenji looked at the comparative molecular profile. Then why did the effect change? The chemist enlarged 2 overlays because one component is absent from the altered samples. Which one? That is the strange part. It is not listed in the official formulation you provided. Kenji sat back. "Are you saying someone added something to the standard batches?" "I am saying the batches you consider standard contain an adjunct your documentation does not disclose." "What does it do?" A pause. "It appears designed to intensify reinforcement response with repeated exposure." Kenji knew enough pharmacology to understand the careful wording. Dependency. That would be my concern. He ended the call. For several seconds, he did not move. Then, he reopened the internal formulation archive. The declared K17 sequence matched Amara's altered batches more closely than it matched the product Arakawa had actually been selling. It meant her sabotage had restored the drug toward the documented formulation. She had not contaminated it. Someone else had, and she had known where to cut. Kenji pulled the authorization history. Most entries were ordinary laboratory chiefs, production officers, compliance aliases. One credential appeared on the original supplemental modification. He stopped scrolling. Masato A01, his father's executive authorization. Kenji went downstairs. Amara was still there, restricted to the outer analysis room under supervision. He dismissed the guard. Then, he placed the report in front of her. "You removed the undeclared adjunct." "Yes." "How did you know it was there?" She read the first page without touching it. "That is the better question." "My father authorized it." Her expression changed, but it wasn't exactly surprise. That was worse. Kenji noticed the old spectrometry unit behind her, a bulky machine the procurement department had tried to replace twice. Masato had personally blocked both requests. Amara had been using the newer system all evening. One hand was planted on the old machine's work surface. "You knew about his signature. I knew there was an authorization trail." "Who told you?" She met his eyes. "I'm not answering that yet." "Yet you still think the problem is what I did to those batches." He leaned toward the report. "You illegally altered a controlled formulation. And your distributors complained because I removed the part that made it addictive. That does not give you authority." "No, it gave me confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" She looked past him toward the sealed production floor. "Of who noticed?" Kenji said nothing. The shipment identifiers she had been studying 2 days earlier came back to him. Not formulas. Roots. He left her there and returned upstairs to pull her personnel file. He expected Kanzaki's name, perhaps an outside recruiter, perhaps a forged approval buried beneath ordinary HR paperwork. The hiring process contained none of them. Amara Vale had bypassed the standard executive interview background review and department recommendation chain. One authorization had placed her directly into the laboratory. Kenji opened the credential detail. Masato A01. He checked the date. 7 months earlier. 1 month before Masato's stroke. Kenji stared at the screen. The woman he had stripped of authority had not slipped into Arakawa Holdings under his father's absence. Masato had put her there himself. And whatever she had been doing to K17 had started before Kenji ever inherited responsibility for the laboratory. Kenji did not confront Amara again that night. He changed her access status. That was enough. At 1:06 a.m., the red restriction beside her name disappeared from the laboratory system. It was replaced by a temporary executive authorization tied directly to his credential. It restored her access to formulation data, shipping records, and analytical equipment, but every action now passed through his account. It was not trust. It was shared liability. Amara noticed immediately. She found him in the logistics office above the laboratory. Freight maps covered one wall and 3 monitors displayed outbound pharmaceutical routes. You gave me access back. I gave myself visibility. Those are not the same thing. No, she remained near the door. Kenji pointed to the screen. Show me why you were studying shipment identifiers. For several seconds, she did nothing. Then she crossed the room. That choice mattered more than an explanation would have. She pulled up the affected lots and grouped them by destination. 3 distribution companies appeared repeatedly: Hoshin Medical Supply, Kanto Therapeutic Logistics, Sika Research Distribution. Kenji recognized all 3. On paper, they belonged to different holding structures, used different banks, and served different regions. You chose these batches. Yes. Why? Because they were not all receiving the same product. He looked at her. The formula was identical. The declared formula was. That answer stopped being useful yesterday. Amara enlarged one of the analytical records. The undeclared adjunct is introduced after the standard stabilization process. It does not appear consistently across every production run. Someone has been selecting which lots receive it. Kenji understood the implication before she continued. You weren't trying to stop production. No, you were testing who complained. She gave a small nod. The rejected shipments suddenly made sense. Only buyers expecting the altered effect would know something was missing. The first reversal had shown that Amara was not poisoning K-17. This was worse. She had been using K-17 to identify people inside the distribution chain. Kenji pulled up ownership records. Hoshin is 32% controlled by Arai Capital. Keep going. Arai is held through 2 domestic trusts, and he opened another database. The second trust connected to a consulting company. The consulting company connected to a private investment vehicle. The final beneficial controller was not listed directly. Kenji searched payment authorization instead. One internal approval signature appeared across fees paid to all 3 distributors. R. Kanzaki. He stared at the screen. That could mean oversight. It could. You don't believe that? No. You still haven't answered who told you where to look. Amara turned from the monitor. You know who brought me into the company. My father. That answers part of it. Only part. He gave me access, not trust. Kenji leaned back. What did he ask you to do? Identify which branches of the K-17 system were operating outside the documented chain. That sounds conveniently specific. It was. Did he tell you Kanzaki was involved? No. The answer came without hesitation. Kenji watched her more carefully. You expect me to believe my father recruited a chemist to investigate his own company, but refused to tell her what she was investigating. Yes, that makes no sense. It makes sense if he didn't know how far the problem went, or if he knew too much. Kenji did not say it. Amara did not offer the possibility for him. That restraint caught his attention. She could have used the discovery to turn him against Masato immediately. Instead, she stayed inside what she could prove. What exactly did he give you? Kenji asked. A formulation history, partial access credentials, a list of production anomalies, and instructions, to separate what could be defended from what could not. Kenji looked back at the distribution map. That was not the language of sabotage. It was a matter of triage. Why didn't you tell me any of this when I removed your authority? Because I didn't know which side of the system you belonged to. The answer should have offended him. It did. But it was also reasonable. You watched me shut down your certification authority. Yes, and that confirmed your suspicion. It confirmed that you were willing to act before you understood the chemistry. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because she was right in the precise way he found infuriating. And now Now I know you paid for an independent analysis instead of asking your own people to validate your decision. That earns me one conversation." He accepted that. For the next 2 hours, they worked without guards in the room. Kenji handled the corporate side. Amara handled the chemistry. The more they compared, the clearer the structure became. The 3 companies had no obvious ownership relationship. Their shipping behavior did. Each received disproportionately high quantities from batches containing the adjunct. Each paid premium handling fees unrelated to refrigeration or transport distance. Each routed secondary payments through consulting contracts too vague to justify their size. Kenji followed the money farther. Not enough to prove criminal control. Enough to show Kanzaki's hidden influence across all 3. At 3:40 a.m., Amara stopped him from freezing the accounts. Not yet. He looked over. I can lock them before morning. And then, what they lose access. So does whoever is behind them. That is the point. No, the point is finding the whole structure. He closed his hand around the mouse, but did not click. She continued. If you close everything now, they know exactly what you discovered. The network changes. New distributors appear. New accounts replace these. You protect the next shipment and lose the map. You are asking me to leave an illicit route open. I am asking you not to destroy evidence before it moves. Kenji stood and walked to the window. Below, trucks entered the logistics compound under white security lights. He had spent years making the network efficient. He built it so no single failure could stop it. Now that redundancy was working against him. You planned this before I restored your access. I planned to learn who noticed the altered lots. Using my company? Yes. My father's company? Yes. And if those shipments had created consequences you couldn't control, they were chemically safer after I changed them. That is not what I asked? No. She did not soften the answer. Kenji turned back. What would you have done if I handed you to Kenzaki yesterday? I would have lost access. That's all. That would have been enough. It told him something about her priorities. She had not been protecting herself. She had been protecting the investigation. He returned to the desk and altered the freeze order. Instead of closing all 3 distributors, he suspended only Hoshin Medical Supply, citing a quality control dispute. 1 route, not 3. Amara saw what he had done. You're testing the response. Yes, and if Kanzaki reacts, then we learn something. For the first time that night, the tension between them eased by a degree. Not trust, recognition. Kenji sent the order. The fallout started before breakfast. At 7:12 a.m., his phone filled with messages from finance. Hoshin represented a larger revenue stream than the laboratory reports had suggested. Canceling its shipments triggered penalties across 2 linked contracts and threatened an upcoming quarterly forecast. At 7:26, a council secretary requested an explanation. At 7:41, Ryuhei Kenzaki called. Kenji answered on speaker. You froze Hoshin. Yes. On whose recommendation? Mine. A pause. That distributor has never failed us. It failed an audit. What audit 1 I ordered? Kenzaki's voice remained even. You're creating losses days before the succession review. Then the review will have accurate numbers. That is not leadership. Kenji glanced at Amara. She did not react. Neither is selling something we cannot account for. The line went quiet for 2 seconds. Then Kanzaki said, Come upstairs. I am upstairs to the family office. No. That refusal changed the conversation. Kanzaki stopped discussing Hoshin. Is Dr. Vale with you? Kenji looked directly at her. Yes. Send her back to the laboratory. She stays where she is. Another pause. Kenji. It was the first time Kanzaki used his name like a warning. Kenji ended the call. The consequence was immediate. By noon, 2 council members requested an emergency review of K-17 profitability. By mid-afternoon, Daigo Arakawa had been invited to attend. No one threatened Amara. No one needed to. The pressure had moved to Kenji. He had used his authority to protect the investigation, and the organization had begun measuring whether he should continue to possess that authority. Amara understood it before he said anything. You didn't have to claim the decision. Yes, I did. You could have blamed quality control. That would have exposed you. That was already obvious, not officially. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. You just spent political capital to keep my name out of a meeting. I spent it to keep the investigation alive. Of course. The faint edge in her voice made him look at her. You don't believe me. I believe that was one reason. He almost asked what she thought the other reason was. He did not. There were enough unanswered questions between them. Instead, he handed her a tablet. Find me every batch tied to Hoshin. She took it. By evening, the results created a new problem. Hoshin's pattern connected to Kanto Therapeutic Logistics through a secondary warehouse contract. Kanto connected to Seika through a shared customs broker. And all three ultimately paid service fees into separate entities administered by people Kanzaki had appointed over the previous 8 years. It was an embedded network. Kenji sat beside Amara in the records room while she compared chemical profiles. Behind her stood the obsolete spectrometry unit. Its screen was dark. A yellow maintenance label dated 6 years earlier still clung to the casing. Replacement request denied executive order. Kenji read it again. My father refused to replace this. So I was told. You noticed it yesterday. I notice old instruments. You touched it. Amara looked at the machine. It's the same model I used early in my career. Does it still work? Probably. Why keep it? I don't know. That was the first answer she'd given all day that sounded unfinished. He let it pass. For now. At 9:18 p.m., a formal notice reached his account. The succession review had been moved forward, not by weeks, by 4 days. The motion had been sponsored by 3 council members. Kanzaki had signed as financial advisor. Daigo had accepted attendance. Kenji read the notice once. He handed the tablet to Amara. She finished it without comment. Then she set it down. They're not trying to remove me anymore? No, they're trying to remove you. Yes, because that was cheaper. Because Kenji held the access Amara needed. Because if he lost succession authority, the investigation could be buried without anyone having to prove she was wrong. He looked toward the shipping map visible through the glass. 3 distributors. 1 frozen. 2 still moving. He had thought restoring Amara's access made her dependent on him. The new notice proved the opposite. By keeping her inside the investigation, he tied his future to her conclusions. If she proved wrong, so was he. Amara folded her arms. If you want to stop, this is the point. Kenji looked at her. You expected me to. I prepared for the possibility. How that is one of the things I'm not telling you yet. He should have ordered her to answer. Instead, he opened the distribution records again. Then, earn another conversation. She pulled her chair closer to the screen. Neither of them would call what had formed between them trust. The next K-17 shipment left Tokyo that night. Kenji knew exactly which 2 routes remained open. Amara knew he had chosen to leave them open. The decision might cost him the inheritance his entire life had been arranged to receive. By the next morning, Kenji understood that the succession review had stopped being a deadline and become a weapon. The meeting had been moved to a private conference floor above one of Arakawa Holdings' legal offices. It was far from the laboratory and closer to the men who cared more about balance sheets than molecular structures. Kanzaki had spent less than 12 hours turning the Hoshin suspension into a broader argument about competence. Kenji knew because the argument was already reaching him through ordinary channels. 2 board members wanted projections revised. 1 shipping subsidiary wanted written confirmation that K-17 contracts would continue. A family accountant asked whether the quality dispute was limited to 1 supplier or indicative of a wider management failure. No one used Amara's name. That was the point. Kanzaki no longer needed to make her the problem. Kenji had attached himself to her decisions publicly enough that any damage to K-17 now belonged to him. Amara stood over a lab terminal while a graph crawled across the screen. They're moving the pressure away from chemistry. Yes, because they can't argue with the chemistry yet. Because they don't need to. She looked back at him. What do you mean? Kenji set a printed notice beside her keyboard. The document did not accuse either of them of wrongdoing. It was cleaner than that. It requested an internal review of executive judgment revenue interruption and unauthorized operational exposure. Amara read it once. They're building a case that you are unstable. Not unstable, unsuitable. That is better. It is easier to vote on. She handed the paper back. And Daigo invited as an alternative. Does he know what Kanzaki is doing? Daigo knows the company is losing money. That may be enough. That distinction mattered. Kenji had never considered his cousin particularly ambitious. Daigo preferred predictability, inherited relationships, and systems that did not embarrass the family. Under different circumstances, those qualities would have made him harmless. Now they made him useful. Kanzaki did not need a conspirator. He needed a respectable replacement. Amara turned back to the terminal. What happens if they remove you before we finish? My access narrows. To what internal shipping authorization? Holding company audits? Account freezes. The exact things we're using. Yes. She closed the graph. Then stop protecting me. Kenji looked at her. No, you did not even ask what I mean. I know what you mean. You could present the access breach as mine. Say I acted outside your instructions. Let the council isolate me instead of you. And lose the lab. I can work around that. You cannot work around revoked credentials. I have before. The line landed differently than the rest. Kenji waited. Amara seemed to realize what she had given away. Before what another institution? That is not an answer. It is more than I intended to give. Instead, he moved to the next problem. Come upstairs. Why I'm suspending Kanzaki's access to Hoshin's parent account. Her expression changed. You said yesterday that would destroy the map. Not the account, his authority over it. That is still a signal. Yes. Then why now? Because if I lose executive standing in 4 days, I lose the ability to do it at all. She stepped away from the terminal. You are accelerating because you are afraid of losing control. I am using control while I still have it. That is not always the same thing. He faced her fully. Do you want Kanzaki inside every account we are tracing? No. Then this buys us time. It also tells him which part of the network you understand. Only one part. That may be enough. They stood on opposite sides of the workbench. The argument was not about trust. It was about method. Amara had spent months keeping uncertainty around her because it kept the investigation alive. Kenji had spent his career reducing uncertainty because uncertainty was how systems failed. Neither was wrong. That made compromise harder. Finally, Amara said, If you suspend him, do not freeze the downstream entities. I wasn't planning to. Do not warn compliance. They report to me. They also report laterally. Kenji considered that. She was right. Fine. He sent the order without copying internal compliance. The effect was immediate. Kanzaki lost approval authority over one account linked to Hoshin. The lab gained breathing room for 3 hours. Then the cost appeared. A senior council member called Kenji directly. You removed Kanzaki from a financial control position without review. Temporary suspension, based on what operational conflict? With whose evidence? Kenji looked through the glass partition at Amara. Mine. The council member did not answer for several seconds. Then, you are making this personal. No, it looks personal. That is not the same thing. It will be when we vote. The call ended. Kenji did not tell Amara immediately. She knew anyway. How much did it cost enough? That is not a number. It moved Daigo from observer to formal candidate. She stopped working. That was the first consequence neither could describe as temporary. You used your position to protect the investigation, she said. Yes, and now the investigation is being used to remove you. Yes. Then this is exactly what I warned you about. You warned me not to move too early. I warned you not to confuse protection with control. He studied her. You think that is what I am doing? I think you are making decisions that affect both of us without asking, because you still believe authority makes the risk yours to assign. That authority is the only reason you still have access. And if I stay, because you control access, what exactly are we building? The question stopped him. Not because it was personal, because it was structurally true. He had restored her credentials. He had shielded her name. He had absorbed political damage. From his perspective, that was protection. From hers, it could become dependency. He stepped away from the terminal. What would you have done? Given me the choice. To be removed to decide what risk I was willing to carry. Kenji looked at the access card clipped to her coat. Then he pulled out his phone. He changed the authorization structure. Her access no longer passed through his personal credential. It became an independent temporary research authorization. It was tied to the lab audit itself. If he lost executive status, hers would survive for 48 hours pending formal review. Amara watched the confirmation appear on her screen. You could have done that yesterday. Yes, why didn't you? Because yesterday I thought shared liability meant shared control. And now it means you get to decide what you do with yours. That was the closest either of them had come to an apology. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Thank you. Nothing more. It was enough to change the room. Later that afternoon, while tracing older K-17 records, Amara found a reference code buried inside a formulation note. She opened it. The name attached to the research did not read Vale. Dr. Amara Mensa. Kenji saw the screen before she closed it. He did not ask immediately. She did. You recognized it. I recognized you. Her hand remained on the mouse. That was my professional name. She stared at the record. London. Years ago. Kenji waited. This time she continued without being forced. The original project was supposed to reduce dependency risk in a related compound. We found a pathway that did the opposite if manipulated. And someone manipulated it. Later, what happened to the project? It disappeared. Research does not disappear. Careers do. That was all she gave him at first. He understood enough. Not grief, not revenge in the simple sense. Erasure. A professional history severed because she had refused to make herself useful to someone else's version of the truth. So Vale was protection. At first, from becoming unemployable, Kenji looked again at the archived name. Masato found you anyway. Yes. How I still don't know. That was important. He could hear it in the way she said it. Masato had not simply hired a talented chemist. He had located someone whose previous work intersected with the chemical weakness in K-17. Kenji looked toward the obsolete spectrometry unit. The same model Amara had said she used early in her career. The same machine his father had refused to replace. You used one of those in London. Yes. Same series. She nodded. Same storage architecture. Amara turned toward the machine. For the first time she looked at it not as laboratory equipment, but as something she had failed to question. Possibly. They crossed the room together. The device was no longer connected to the central network. Kenji checked the maintenance log attached to the casing. Replacement recommended. Replacement denied. Then again, and again. Always by executive override. Masato. Amara powered the unit on. The boot sequence took nearly 2 minutes. An outdated interface appeared. Local storage. No network synchronization. No cloud archive. No corporate server access. Kenji watched her navigate through old system directories. Most were empty. One partition was not. Encrypted. The file header showed a date from the earliest K-17 patent cycle. before Kanzaki's current distribution structure, before Amara joined the company, before Masato's stroke. Amara stopped. This is deliberate. Kenji looked at her. You said you didn't know why he kept it? I didn't, but now I know he kept something off the network. Before they could open it, Kenji's phone vibrated. A formal council resolution. He read the first lines and handed it to her. The offer was explicit. Restore K-17 distribution. Return operational authority to Kanzaki. Submit Dr. Amara Vale for internal investigation as an independent saboteur. In exchange, Kenji's succession eligibility would remain intact. Amara finished reading. So, this is the choice. No, it is written very clearly. Kenji looked at the encrypted partition on the old machine. No, this is the choice they think I have. He rejected the resolution. He added no statement. The refusal registered instantly. There would be no private retreat now. No quiet compromise. No way to restore the previous balance without admitting why he had broken it. Amara watched the confirmation appear. You just made yourself part of the evidence. I already was. She turned back to the machine. The password field waited. Below it was a single hint. Patent date. Amara entered the original K-17 filing date. The partition opened. Inside was one video file. No title, no folder. Just a timestamp from 7 months earlier. 1 month before Masato's stroke. Kenji clicked it. His father appeared on the screen. Older than Kenji remembered him from that period. Tired, deliberate. He looked directly into the camera. Then he said 2 names. Kenji, Dr. Mensah. Amara went still beside him. Masato had not only known who she really was. He had expected months before either of them understood the shape of the investigation that they would eventually open the file together. Masato's recorded face held for several seconds. Then he spoke again. If you are watching this together, then the controlled version of K-17 has failed. Kenji stood beside Amara in front of the old spectrometry unit. One hand rested on the edge of the desk. His father looked thinner in the recording than he had in Kenji's memory from 7 months earlier. There was no hospital gown, no visible crisis. Masato had made the file while still in command. That made every word more deliberate. I authorized the adjunct. Kenji stopped moving. Amara did not. She reached for the keyboard and paused the video. He looked at her. Play it. She did. Masato continued. Years ago, the legitimate transition was failing. Revenue from the new companies could not carry the old obligations. Kanzaki proposed a supplemental formulation that would create stronger repeat demand in private channels. The language was corporate. The meaning was not. I approved it. Kenji's eyes remained on the screen. Not tricked, not coerced. Approved. The authorization credential from Chapter 1 had not been forged. The secret compound had not been inserted behind Masato's back. Masato had signed it into existence. Amara folded her arms. Masato went on. At first, the volume was limited. The profit stabilized the transition. The legal companies grew. The dependence on the old organization decreased. Kenji gave a short, humorless breath. By increasing dependence somewhere else, Masato's recording could not answer him. By the time I ordered the formulation, reduced the network no longer answered only to me. Kanzaki, the 3 distributors, the consulting contracts, the 8 years of appointments. The shape of the problem changed in 1 sentence. Kanzaki had not created corruption inside a clean system. He had expanded a system Masato had deliberately begun. Masato continued. The product ceased to be one revenue stream. It became leverage. Distributors depended on it. Intermediaries depended on it. People inside the organization began depending on the revenue it created. Amara glanced at Kenji. He understood now why simply closing everything had always been dangerous. The network was not hidden beneath Arakawa Holdings. Parts of Arakawa Holdings had been built around it. Masato's face remained steady. I could have exposed Kanzaki. I would have exposed myself with him. Kenji looked away from the screen. Amara watched him, but she said nothing. That restraint mattered. There was no comfort available that would not sound false. Masato had spent Kenji's adult life teaching him to modernize the family. He taught him to reduce illicit exposure and build systems that could survive without fear. Now, Kenji knew part of that modernization had been financed by the very dependencies Masato later said he rejected. The recording moved on. I contacted Dr. Amara Mensa because her earlier research identified the chemical mechanism we had exploited. Amara's attention sharpened. Masato had not simply found her resume. He had been tracing the source of the work. She had already refused once to allow commercial interests to redefine her findings. Amara looked down. Kenji remembered her words from the previous day. Research does not disappear. Careers do. Masato continued. I needed someone who could separate the therapeutic compound from the revenue stream without wrecking either. That was why Amara had never neutralized every batch. Why she had selected only certain lots. Why she had been told to separate what could be defended from what could not. Her so-called sabotage had been a controlled diagnostic. Not against the drug alone, against the network. Masato leaned slightly closer to the camera. Kanzaki will react to lost dependency revenue more quickly than he reacts to accusations. Let him reveal which routes matter. Kenji looked at Amara. So the altered shipments were always meant to provoke complaints. Yes, she said quietly. You knew that part. I knew what he wanted me to test, but not why. No. That distinction survived. Masato had given Amara a mission without giving her his confession. The video continued. If Kenji becomes involved, do not assume he belongs on my side. Kenji's expression changed. Amara looked back at the screen. Masato spoke with the same tone he had once used in succession meetings. Watch what he protects. Kenji said nothing. Watch what he is willing to lose. The old sentence came back to him. Never inherit what you haven't examined yourself. He had treated it as discipline. A father training a son to audit balance sheets and question advisors. It had been preparation. Masato had been preparing him to discover an inheritance. It might not deserve preservation. Then came the line, neither of them expected in quite that form. If he protects the company, before he protects the truth, do not save it for him. Amara went still. Kenji stared at his father's recorded face. That was the real test. Not whether Amara could expose Kanzaki, whether Kenji would become another man willing to preserve the institution because too many people depended on it. Masato had hidden the evidence in the obsolete machine for the same reason he had refused to replace it. No corporate synchronization, no Kanzaki-controlled server, no automated purge. The ridiculous old spectrometer was not obsolete equipment. It was a dead drop. Two clues aligned at once. The machine, the Maxim. Both had been sitting in front of Kenji for years. The video ended with one final instruction. Do not destroy what can be separated. Do not preserve what cannot. Then the screen went black. For a while, neither spoke. Kenji finally said, he built forgiveness into the evidence. Amara looked at him. What do you mean? He admits it after creating a method to undo it. That lets him become the man who corrected the problem. He also tells us not to protect him. That does not erase the first decision. No, you sound like you're defending him. I'm not. Then what are you doing refusing to make your decision for you? That irritated him more than defense would have. He turned toward her. You knew he recruited you because of your old research. Yes. You knew he wanted the roots exposed. Yes. You knew enough to manipulate shipments inside my company? Yes. But you didn't know he authorized the adjunct? No. Kenji studied her face. He believed her. Not because he wanted to, because every choice she had made fit the boundaries she had claimed from the beginning. She had never once tried to convince him Masato was innocent. She had also never accused him without proof. Trust did not arrive as warmth. It arrived as the removal of one more reason to doubt. Kenji's phone vibrated. The succession session had been moved forward again. 2 hours. Kanzaki had forced the crisis. Amara read the notification over his shoulder. We don't have time to trace everything. No? So the old strategy is finished. Yes. They had spent days observing. Now observation would only give Kanzaki time to replace the routes. Kenji opened the logistics network. 3 distributors. Hoshin frozen. Kanto and Seika active. Dozens of downstream accounts. Amara moved beside him. If we expose the video by itself, he says Masato acted alone. If we expose the finance records alone, he says ordinary oversight. If we expose the altered batches alone, they call it your sabotage. Then we join them. Kenji looked at her. That was the shift. They no longer needed one perfect piece of evidence. They needed a chain no single explanation could absorb. Amara began pulling archived samples. I can prove the adjunct is introduced after the declared therapeutic formulation. You already proved it exists. That is not enough. I need to show where the divergence occurs in production. What does that give us? It separates the legitimate research line from the dependency line. Kenji understood. Without that distinction, the council could argue that exposing K-17 meant destroying every legal pharmaceutical asset connected to it. That fear was Kanzaki's shield. Amara could remove it. What do you need? Full batch access. Historic chromatograms. Everything from the old unit. You have it, and no one interferes. They won't. This time, she believed the promise enough to turn away and start working. Kenji moved upstairs. He did not call family security. He called logistics. The distinction mattered. He blocked Kanto and Seika from initiating new outbound transfers. He left one downstream corridor open under monitoring. His operations chief sounded uncertain. You want it open, I want movement. If they know the others are restricted, they'll push through that route. That is why it stays open. Kenji then froze the shell company interfaces tied to the 2 known distributors. Not the destination accounts. Not yet. He needed Kanzaki to move. The first transfer attempt came 11 minutes later. A consulting entity shifted funds into a warehouse holding company. A second moved inventory allocation through a customs broker. A third request linked both to a private administrative account Kenji had seen dozens of times, but never had cause to examine. Kanzaki's authorization token appeared on the request. There it was. Not one signature on one supplier. Operational control across the network. Kenji forwarded the logs to an external forensic archive. He did it before internal administrators could touch them. Power used. Cost incurred. The moment he did that, the action became discoverable. The council would know he had moved internal corporate records outside Arakawa control. If they removed him now, they could accuse him of breaching fiduciary duty. He had crossed the point where succession could still be preserved quietly. Downstairs, Amara found what she needed. The old spectrometry archive contained original therapeutic profiles from before the adjunct was introduced. The later samples showed a second-stage modification that existed only in batches routed through the 3 distributor channels. She built the comparison herself. No interpretation, no rhetoric. Before and after. Documented and altered. One legitimate product, one revenue mechanism attached to it. By the time the succession session began, they had 2 independent chains. Amara had the chemical one. Kenji had the financial one. They entered the conference room separately. That was deliberate. Kanzaki sat to Masato's former right. Daigo sat opposite him. The council had received a summary accusing Kenji of creating unnecessary losses. It also said he shielded an employee who admitted unauthorized formulation changes. Kanzaki began without theatrics. There is still a path that preserves stability. Kenji took his seat. Kanzaki slid a resolution across the table. Restore distribution. Return financial authority. Submit Amara to internal investigation. Maintain Kenji's succession eligibility. Exactly as before. But now the offer revealed more than Kanzaki knew. He still believed inheritance was the leverage. Kenji looked at the document. Then at Daigo. Then at the council. I decline succession. No one moved. Daigo looked at him sharply. Kanzaki's expression finally broke. "Do not be theatrical." "I'm not." Kenji signed a separate resignation from the succession process and placed it on the table. The leverage disappeared in ink. Kanzaki leaned forward. "You are giving away your father's position over a laboratory dispute." "No." Kenji opened the financial logs. "I'm giving it away so you cannot use it to price my silence." That was when Amara entered the evidence into the room. Not herself as a witness first, the chemistry. She showed that the therapeutic formulation and dependency adjunct were separable. Then Kenji showed that the altered distribution channels converged under Kanzaki's financial control. Kanzaki tried the obvious defense. Masato authorized the formulation. "Yes," Kenji said. The room changed. He did not protect his father. That was the moment Masato's test ended. Kenji played the relevant portion of the recording. Not as absolution, as admission. The council now faced a choice different from the one Kanzaki had prepared for them. Protecting him no longer protected Arakawa Holdings. It tied the surviving legitimate companies directly to a network already documented outside their control. Daigo understood first. "If we keep these routes open," he said, looking at Kanzaki, "we inherit the liability with them." Kanzaki turned toward him. "You inherit revenue." "Not enough." Daigo closed the resolution. That was the structural defeat. Not loyalty. Arithmetic. Kanzaki had built power by making himself necessary. Amara proved the legitimate operation could survive without the hidden formulation. Kenji proved the hidden operation could not survive without Kanzaki's controlled routes. Separating the two removed his leverage. The council suspended Kanzaki's financial authority pending external investigation. The 3 distributor channels were locked. The accounts he had attempted to move were preserved. No gunfire followed. No one needed to drag him from the room. He simply sat there, while the system stopped answering to him. Kenji left before the council finished arguing over what remained. Amara caught up with him near the elevator. "You did not have to resign before presenting the evidence." "Yes, I did." "Why?" "Because if I kept the inheritance as a possible reward, I would never know whether I was telling the truth or bargaining for it." She looked at him. That was the action neither of them could reduce to strategy. He had given up the thing he had spent his life preparing to receive before he knew whether the evidence would succeed. Amara reached for his hand. Only briefly. No declaration, no promise, just contact. Then she let go. The elevator arrived. Behind them, the council was dismantling the network they had exposed. Ahead of them, there was no succession waiting for Kenji, and no mission still binding Amara to him. For the first time since they met, the external problem was nearly over. What remained was harder to calculate. They would now have to decide without pressure what, if anything, they wanted. By the following morning, the Arakawa organization had already begun dividing itself into what could be defended and what could not. The language came from Masato's recording. It spread faster than anyone admitted. Kanzaki's authority over the 3 distribution companies was suspended first. Then, the external forensic team Kenji had used to preserve the transfer logs was granted access to the accounts. 2 subsidiaries connected almost entirely to K-17's altered distribution were placed into wind-down review. A third survived, only because Amara's chemical separation proved most of its activity involved legitimate pharmaceutical transport. No one called it victory. The stock value of Arakawa Holdings fell hard enough that the financial press noticed. The company had not issued a statement. The council spent the day arguing over disclosure. Kenji was not invited. That was the first consequence of resigning. For most of his adult life, rooms had opened because of his surname and his expected future. Now he stood in the laboratory. Other people decided what remained of the empire he had been trained to inherit. Amara found him reading the same shipping report twice. "You're not in the meeting." "No." Do you want to be? He considered the question. Yesterday, I would have said yes. And today I think being there would tempt me to start fixing things that should instead be broken. She placed a folder beside him. The withdrawal order for K-17, all active batches had been recalled pending investigation. The legitimate therapeutic line might eventually return under a different structure, but not under the Arakawa formulation or branding. Kenji looked at the document. That destroys the product. It destroys this version of it. 40% of the projected pharmaceutical division disappears with it. Yes. He looked at her. You say that very calmly. I spent years watching people preserve bad decisions because admitting the loss felt worse. That sounds personal. It is. The folder also contained something else. Her name, Dr. Amara Mensa. Not Vale. The external review had validated the earlier research chain. She had been forced to abandon it in London. The documents did not restore the years that followed. They did not return projects, contacts, or reputation exactly as they had been, but they established that her objections had been scientifically sound. Kenji touched the page once. You're using Mensa again. I think so. You don't sound certain. Vale kept me working when Mensa became inconvenient. So you keep both, maybe? He nodded. That answer made sense to him. Not everything needed to be purified into one clean identity. Some things survived because they had adapted. Kanzaki's ending was less dramatic than the council had feared. It was more complete than he had expected. He was removed from all financial authority inside Arakawa Holdings. The external investigation continued. His consulting companies were cut off from the surviving subsidiaries. The accounts he had tried to move during Kenji's monitored freeze became evidence. They prevented him from claiming he had been only an advisor, following Masato's instructions. Masato's confession protected Kanzaki from becoming the sole origin of the scheme. Kenji's logs prevented him from becoming innocent. That distinction remained. Daigo accepted temporary control of the family's remaining traditional interests. When he came to the laboratory 2 days later, he did not ask Kenji to return. You made succession impossible. I know. You made half the council look like fools. They managed that themselves. Daigo almost smiled. Then he looked toward Amara's work area. They think she destroyed the company. She kept the parts worth saving. That is not how they will remember her. I know. Daigo studied him. You are not coming back. No. This time, there was no hesitation. Daigo nodded once. Then stop interfering from outside. I will. That surprised him. Kenji had spent years expecting succession to end with one man winning. The other would lose. Instead, it ended with boundaries. Daigo took what remained. Kenji chose not to control it. 3 weeks later, Masato woke enough to understand what had happened. Kenji visited him alone. It wasn't the kind of dramatic confrontation the family's old stories promised. Masato could only manage short phrases. He asked about K-17. Gone, Kenji said. Kanzaki. Finished inside the company. Masato closed his eyes for several seconds. Then he asked the question Kenji had expected. The succession I resigned. Masato looked at him again. For the first time, real worry showed on his face. Kenji almost laughed. You built a test to see if I'd choose the company over the truth. Masato's breathing changed. You passed. No. Kenji leaned forward. I refused the test. Masato watched him. You don't get to shape my morality after financing your own compromises. You gave me evidence. That was useful. It was not absolution. Masato's eyes lowered. Kenji stood. He did not tell his father he would never return. He also did not offer forgiveness. What was between them would have to survive without either man. Before leaving, Kenji stopped at the door. You always told me not to inherit what I hadn't examined. Masato looked up. I examined it. Kenji left. That was the last inheritance he accepted from him. Amara could have returned to London within the month. Her professional standing had been repaired enough that 3 institutions contacted her. One offered a research appointment, another offered funding to resume dependency reduction work. Kenji knew because she told him. He did not ask her to stay. Instead, he spent his time separating several legal logistics assets he still controlled. He removed them from Arakawa. No family crest, no private enforcement division, no council oversight, just transport contracts, audit systems, and enough capital to begin again. Amara watched the separation from a distance. One afternoon, he placed a transfer document on her desk. She read the first page, then the second. The laboratory had been reorganized as an independent pharmaceutical verification company. Her company. She looked up. You transferred your controlling interest. Yes. Why? Because if I keep it, then eventually every decision between us has an owner. You could remain a minority partner. I could, but you won't. No. She closed the folder. You understand this means you cannot remove me anymore. That is the idea. A faint smile appeared. It was the first time either of them could speak about control without pretending it was only professional. And if I leave Japan, the company remains yours. That answer mattered more than anything he could have said about wanting her to stay. There was no condition attached, no protection that turned into possession when examined closely. A week later, Amara came to the office Kenji had rented above a smaller warehouse. It was on the other side of Tokyo. There were no guards outside, no Arakawa emblem. 3 desks, 2 screens, 1 shipping map. Kenji looked up when she entered. I thought you were meeting with the London group? I was. How did it go? They want me back. He nodded. You should consider it. I did. She put a file on his desk. A distribution proposal. His company name appeared at the top. Her laboratory appeared beneath it. Kenji looked from the document to her. You need a carrier. I need one I can audit. That sounds exhausting. I learned from difficult people. He read the first page. This is a 3-year agreement. Yes. You're staying 3 years. I'm signing a 3-year contract. That is not the same answer. No. He understood. She was not promising forever, because forever was easy to say after crisis. She was choosing something concrete while retaining the right to choose again. Kenji signed. 18 months later, the old spectrometry unit still stood in the corner of Amara's laboratory. It was no longer connected to anything. No one wanted to throw it away. One evening, Kenji arrived with a shipment audit from their largest medical client. Amara read it carefully. You checked the chain twice. She signed. He left his hand on the file. She placed hers beside it. No one owned the decision now. That was why it meant something. Love became real only after neither of them needed power to keep the other close. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.